Well, good evening, everyone. How you doing? Friday evening, 9 p.m. here on the East Coast, 6 p.m. I guess on the West Coast. My name's Lee Love, and thank you very much for joining me. There we go. So listen, we're going to answer some questions and answer tonight. And again, I appreciate you spending some time with me. I do this every Friday evening at 9 p.m., as I said, Eastern time. And I know you guys have a lot going on. You don't have to be hanging out with me, but I appreciate it. And I'm going to try and get got a lot of good questions this evening, and I'm going to try and get to all of them. If you want to leave a question, please post a comment in the Facebook page. To get to the Facebook page, you can go to, let's see if I have this here, the URL. No, I don't. Anyway, you can send an email to help@photomentor.tv if you want to leave a message later on, not a live one. But if you want to leave a question, post it in the Facebook page. Put a Q in front of it, a capital Q and a colon, and then your question, and that'll show up then in my software. You can do the same on Facebook. On YouTube as well, which I believe is working. I'm not sure. Last week I had the YouTube comments working, but not the Facebook comments. And this week I got the Facebook comments, but not the YouTube comments. So who knows? We'll see. But anyway, to get to either one of those, it's facebook.photomentor.tv, or the YouTube URL is youtube.photomentor.tv. Any one of those will get you to those platforms. Let's see, what else? So one thing I like to explain to people is why I do this. What's the point? And frankly, it's out of my own frustration. I see a lot of people post questions, new photographers post questions in Facebook groups and forums and things like that. And it's just a little frustrating for me because I see either incomplete answers or no answers or, smart remarks or, hey, go look it up on YouTube. That is not the way to help someone that's struggling, that's trying to learn photography. And I have a heart for that, quite honestly. I love helping new photographers and helping them along. I think it's a terrific hobby or as a business. I've been doing this for about 30 years now. And it's just a terrific opportunity, and I think we all are artists. There's all artists inside of us, and photography allows you to bring that out of you. And so I want to encourage that. I want to see more of that. And so I'm happy to answer questions. And I should also mention there are no silly questions. There just aren't any. Because we all start at zero, no matter who we are. And so ask whatever you want, and if I can answer it, I absolutely won't. I will. If I can't, I will find out and get back to you, or maybe I'll refer you to something. But I can definitely. I want to hear what questions you have, and I love the simple ones because it reminds me, frankly, of the things that I've forgotten. When you've been doing this as long as I have, you forget. People don't know some of this stuff, and you just assume they do, and that's a mistake. So anyway, so that's why I do this. My advice is based on my own experience of many, many years. I think it's pretty accurate, but with any advice, mine or anybody else's, take it with a grain of salt, test it, try it. If it doesn't work for you, if it's my advice, then come back and say, hey, this doesn't work, why? And I'll do my best to try and explain it. My advice is based on the context of what you're telling me, so it's kind of hard to say, oh, go do this or do this without knowing all the details. But again, I don't know every answer, but so if you don't like my answer, that's cool. I don't expect everybody to agree with me, and we all have differing opinions. All I ask is that you be courteous to the new members, the new photographers who are trying to learn. Okay, again, I think that's pretty much it. Question and answers. Let's get to some of this stuff tonight. Let's see here. I think this is the first one. Oh, this is the one for, Billy Rybka is the one who did the, I always get Billy's last name wrong, is the one who did the countdown timer for us, and I appreciate that. But that's not the question I want to do tonight. The first one I want is actually one that was a really great question, I thought. And it was sent to me earlier this afternoon by Ali Nova. And Ali asked a question about holding your camera. She said, tips for holding your camera steady for macro or long exposure when you forget your tripod. Hey, all been there. So I'm going to show you a technique that I use. I learned many, many years ago from another photographer. I used to shoot a lot of concert photography and sports and photojournalism, but mainly concerts where this really came in handy. And the problem when shooting concert photography is low light, of course. Looks like it's bright, but it's dark. You got artists running around on stage. You got moving subjects. That makes it kind of tough. And you're typically shooting at low shutter speeds or high ISOs. So, I kind of perfected this technique that this guy taught me, and it works really well. So, got my camera out here, and I thought I would show it to you, and I'll show you how this works. So, this is kind of an odd, it's going to look weird. I'll tell you right up front. I've actually had people come up to me after or while I've been at a concert or whatever, or some event, and they'll go, what's that thing you were doing? Because they'll actually see this and they'll ask me about it. It's so odd looking. So let me do it without the camera first. So what you want to do, and I'm going to switch cameras here. Let's see if this works. Okay. So what you want to do is you want to take your arm and you want to take this arm and you want to put it over here on this side. And basically what you're trying to do is make like a little notch right here for your camera. It works better if you have a longer lens, of course, but so the way it works is this. So you take this like this and you bring it around like this and you bring this in and you hold it real tight. I don't know if you guys can see that or not. Can you see that? Okay, so you hold it real tight, and then you bring it up to your eye, and you push it against your eye, and you hold it real steady. And so, now the problem is, of course, you lose the ability to zoom. So you have to kind of get your composition right before you do this mode. And like I said, it works better with a longer lens. But you bring this around like this, and you put this up like this, and you hold it into your face. And then what I would do is I typically will shoot 2 frames. I call it double tap. Boom, boom. And the reason I do that is because the first one is often a little soft because I'm kind of getting steady, and the second one tends to be a little sharper. So I won't do brr, brr, I'll do doon 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 doon. I'll do 2 at a time, 2 at a time, 2 at a time. But this technique, I could shoot concert photography down almost to 15th of a second at times if I'm really good with my breath control and I hold the thing tight. So it's a really good technique. Again, hopefully you guys can see this. I'll turn this way like it. So again, you take this arm, you bring it over here like so, and you bring this in here and you set it right in here, and you just kind of use this part of your arm to hold the thing. So the idea is, if you're holding it like this, you got all these axes you can move the thing on, right? So it's hard to hold it steady. But here, you really only have this movement. So it's a really good technique, and give it a try and see what you think. I'd love to hear if you see that it works for you. So, Allie, that was your question, and I really appreciate it. That was a very good one, by the way. And so hopefully that answered your question. It's macro photography is kind of tough in general because your depth of field is so shallow. There's even no matter what you're shooting at, no matter what aperture, it's still very, very shallow. And the other thing is you can do is kind of brace against something. If there's something nearby you can do, that's another technique that'll help. But it's all breath control and holding that camera as steady as you can. And then again, hit a couple of shots, try it, then kind of relax, try another couple. Anyway, hopefully that helped to answer your question. Okay, let's see what else we got here, Allie. Here we go. Is another one. This is another good question. This is Amaza asks, could I talk a little bit about filters, types, and usage? Yes. Okay. There are three basic types of filters, maybe 4, but 3 basic types of filters that you're going to want, that you'll need or shoot with when you're doing digital photography. Now, with film photography, it was a little different. We had a few more that we would typically use, but with digital photography, there's only 3. The first one is a UV filter for ultraviolet. It does a little bit of blocking of UV, but mainly it's there to protect the lens. Now, this is a little bit of a trick or something I should mention with any filters that you get, and I see this mistake a lot. People will say, oh, well, I need a filter, a clear filter to protect my lens. Okay, great. So I'm going to put a UV filter on there. But then they say, well, I don't want to spend a lot of money. I just want to use it to protect the lens. The mistake is, if you put any piece, this lens right here is probably, I don't know, $2,300, $2,400, maybe $2,700. I don't remember what it is anymore. But let's just say it's a $2,000 lens. You do not want to put a $20 filter in front of it. Because now you got this really nice, expensive piece of glass, and you're putting this cheap filter in front of it. I've seen people that come in and say, I think there's something wrong with my my camera, my lens. It used to be sharp, but now it's not. You take the filter off and you shoot with it, and you find out it was the quality of the filter. So you want to match the filter to the quality of the lens. If you have a kit lens or an inexpensive lens, then maybe it doesn't matter. But I try to get the best filters I can. Or if you can't afford a really good filter, don't use a filter, because it will affect the quality of your photo. So that's the first thing. So a good quality, what makes a good quality filter, I should mention, are typically 2 things. One is, 3 things. The quality of the glass, obviously. The coatings, they'll multi-coating. So what they do is they coat these lenses with this material that keeps reflections from hitting or from getting into the hitting the filter. And the reason you want to do that and why those coating. If you notice on the front of the lens, if you look at it, I don't think you guys could probably see it on this lens, but if I hold it, see, you can kind of see kind of some reflection. Look, yeah, right in there. That's the coatings you're seeing there, and that eliminates the light hitting on it, and that's why you want to use a lens hood, by the way. But that eliminates the light from reflecting off the front of the glass and diffusing it. What happens when you have a poor quality filter on there is that it will you'll lose contrast. And when you lose contrast, then you lose color. I don't know if you've noticed that or not, but even in your software, if you take a image and you just lower the contrast, it looks all washed out. It's the same thing that happens with your lens. Anyway, I don't mean to get off track, but so what happens is, so you want a good quality filter. The three things to look for are, you want the good quality glass. Hopefully it's multi-coated. And then the third thing you'll find is that the quality of the material it's made of. The real good ones are made out of brass, not aluminum, but still, I mean, that's not as big a deal as the quality of the glass. So, okay, so now the types of filters. So there's a UV filter, there is a polarizing filter, and there's typically a neutral density filter. So you can almost always leave the UV filter on, and you can screw over top of that. But if you think you're getting some problems, take that off and try it without it. But most of the time you can leave that on. So what you want to do is you want to take the filter, you put it on, and so a polarizing filter is basically two filters in one. You know, I should have, I wish I didn't have this question earlier, or I would have brought a filter to show you. But basically it's two filters in one, and so when you turn the filter, it changes polarization. And what that does is it removes reflections off. So if glass, metal, mainly off of water is where I really, or it will also help with sky, but not as much with water. So if you're photographing water and you have a polarizer in there, you turn that, and so that it gets to a point where it's opposite of the angle the sun is coming at, and it will eliminate a lot of those reflections. We'll also do a little bit with the sky, and sometimes it'll darken the sky just a little bit, but it's really hit or miss. It really depends on where the sun is, the angle of the light coming in, so it's not a guarantee on the sky, but it does a pretty good job on glass surfaces. I've used it for product photography and things like that. And also on water. The third kind of filter, which is very popular, is a neutral density filter. Now, neutral density filter is typically rated in the number of stops. So what will happen, there's two kinds for the most part. There's a fixed neutral density filter, and it says, okay, it's going to block 1 stop, 3 stops, 6 stops, 8 stops. So what that means is it's basically like putting something in front of the lens to diminish the amount of light coming in. It's a high quality filter. Now the other type that they have is a variable ND filter, and that way that works, that also has two elements, and when you rotate it, it doesn't do polarization, it actually blocks the light. Now, why do you want to use a neutral density filter? What's the point? Well, the two applications that I can think of that I use most often would be, I don't do much landscape photography, but if I was a landscape photographer and you wanted to photograph water, and we've all seen those photos of the water all nice and smoky and silky and smooth looking. Well, the way to do that is to shoot at a really slow shutter speed on a tripod, half a second, 2 seconds, 3 seconds, 20 seconds, whatever it may be. But the problem is you can't do that in the middle of the day. Even if you lower your ISO down to 100 or 50 or whatever the lowest number is, and you crank the aperture up to 22 or 32, you're still going to find you can't shoot at a really slow shutter speed because there's just too much light. So the neutral density or ND filter, and we'll pick on the variable one. Those are the ones I kind of like. The variable one, you can just dial that in. So let's say you want to shoot at 2 seconds. You get the exposure, you get the 2 seconds, you get your aperture and everything set, and then you just rotate that neutral density filter until it blocks the amount of light till you get a proper exposure at that shutter speed, and then you're good to go. Now, the other application would be for portrait photography. So what happens there is maybe you're outside, you want to, This lens I'm using here is a f2.8, but f2.8 is, even again, shooting at 8,000th of a second, there's going an ISO 100, there's still going to be too much light. So what you do is you put that neutral density filter on there, and you block out 2, 3, 4, 5 lights, stops of light, and now that lets me shoot wide open at 2.8 because it blocks a lot of the light coming in. So those are the two main applications. Now, there's kind of another application. If you're into landscape photography, there's the I should also mention, by the way, before I move on, neutral density filters are also used a lot in video. So when I'm shooting video, I do that a lot because, and I won't go into the details, but with video, you really can't change the shutter speed. It's locked. The shutter speed is typically twice of the frame rate. So if you're shooting at 24 frames a second, then you got to be shooting at 50th or 60th of a second, and that's it. You can't really move it. Anyway, a whole nother issue. So what you do is you, if you want to shoot wide open at 2.8, oh, I know, I'm sorry, got off track here. So the other kind of filter is a square filter, and that usually is a drop-in filter, and that goes in front of, there's a holder that screws on the front of the lens, and that goes in front of it. And the reason you use those, a lot of those are used a lot in video because they have these matte boxes that go in there, but the main reason for still photography is they're graduated. So it may be darker at the top and gradually get lighter and lighter. So I know we've all seen these pictures. I've seen many people ask questions in these groups about, you know, how do I fix this problem with my sky being washed out, my person and the people being in the proper exposure. There's a lot of reasons, a lot of ways to do that. Lighting is the easiest in my opinion. But what a landscape photographer will do is they'll use this graduated ND filter, and that blocks the sky and darkens the sky enough, but yet so that the exposure is the same as the foreground. And that's how you do that. So anyway, it's a long explanation. I apologize, but there's a lot to filters, and we'll kind of hopefully that answered your question. Okay. So let's see what we got here. So Wendy asked a question. Let's see what Wendy here has to say. All right, Wendy wants to know, when transitioning from automatic mode to learning how to use other controls, shutter speed, aperture, which would you begin practicing first? Excellent question, Wendy. Thank you. This is a little bit of a rant for me, and I'll try not to get off on it, but I'm not a big believer in shooting on manual. Well, let me back up a second. I shoot on manual, but I think it's overblown. I see over and over again people are like, oh, you got to shoot on manual. You can't do, in these groups. You don't have to shoot on manual. The only reason you shoot on manual is because the lighting may change and you don't want the camera to adjust. But anyway, I'll go into that. So I shoot, and you know what? It's interesting because almost all the professional photographers I know, although I hear other people in these groups say differently, I'll shoot on aperture priority. I shoot 99% on aperture priority. So if you're on a Canon, I think that's an AV mode. If you're on a Nikon, it's just an A mode. Now, why do I shoot on aperture priority so much? The reason is because aperture controls my depth of field, how much information is in focus. So here's an analogy. I do a lot of magazine work. So let's say I'm doing a story on somebody, and I go into their location, could be a shop or whatever, and the article is about the person saving a cat from the tree. Okay, so I'm in their business. There's a lot of stuff going on. The background does not contribute to the story. The background is the opposite. It makes it too confusing. So I want to blur that background out. So I want to use a wide open aperture to make that black background dark or blurred, shallow depth of field, because it doesn't contribute to the story. It takes away from the story. Now, let's say the article, though, was about this person that's a shopkeeper, and maybe they've come up with some new innovative camera technology, and the guy owns a camera shop. Well, then, if I'm in there photographing that person, I want some of that background. I want to be able to see, it doesn't have to be super sharp, maybe f4.5, 5.6, somewhere around there. It doesn't have to be super sharp, but I want you to see that we're in a camera shop. So therefore, I would then make that adjustment. So that's one of the main reasons I shoot on aperture priority. The other thing I'll tell you is I don't understand this mentality of shooting on manual. Now, this is something people may disagree with, and it's okay with me. But you spend $3,000 on the fanciest camera you can buy. It's got all these crazy focusing modes, and it can shoot at 20 frames a second, blah 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 blah. And what do? You put it on manual, and you turn it into a dumb film camera that you could have used in the 1960s. It doesn't make sense to me to turn off all the features of the camera to be able to shoot. So what I want to do is I want to decide. So what I will do is I will typically pick two settings. So aperture and ISO, and let the camera pick the shutter speed. All right. Now, the opposite would be, and so if I'm doing auto racing and I'm panning with the camera, or I want to show motion somehow, then shutter is priority. So then I will select the shutter speed and the ISO and let the camera pick the aperture, because the aperture in that regard is not as important. So I always pick two of the items and let the camera pick the third one. Now, if I shoot a picture, let's go back to my concert example. So in a concert, I know there's going to be some movement, and I really want a sharper picture. In that particular case, then I probably want to be on shutter priority, because I want to make sure that I get that picture frozen as much as possible. So I may then want to shoot at 1/25th of a second, or whatever, 2/50th, depending on how much light there is, and let the camera pick the other one. The other lesson that I've learned, and this is about ISO, and it's a hard one for me to learn to give up, I'll be honest with you, and that is, being a old film guy, we always shot at, ISO 25 was Kodachrome, and ISO 100, and then it was called ASA. But the point was, you wanted to shoot at the lowest ISO possible, and you still do, because you get the lowest noise. But here's the problem. Nowadays, these cameras can shoot at ISO 1600, 3200, 6400, 12,800, and get really amazing results. What I have discovered is that my clients will accept a picture with noise, if you want to call it that, but they will not accept a picture that's blurry. I can't give them a picture that's out of focus. So if it means getting a picture that's sharp and a little bit noisy, then I'd much rather go with a picture and turn up the ISO and shoot at a higher shutter speed if I need to, and get a nice sharp picture. In my opinion, the only people that care about noise are other photographers. I hear them talk about it all the time. I see them mention it. Oh, there's noise, this, ISO, that. I never hear my clients say anything about it. They don't care. They want to know, is the picture communicate what they're saying? If you're shooting for a family member and it's a really wonderful picture of a newborn, are they going to go, oh, wow, that's a beautiful baby. Oh, too bad it's noisy. No, they don't care. The emotion trumps all that stuff. So anyway. Probably got way off topic, Wendy. I apologize. I hope that helped. I don't know if it did or not, but feel free to ask another question. By the way, again, anytime you have any other questions, you're welcome to send me an email, help@photomentor.tv, and I'll be glad to answer it directly if I can't, or I'll add it to the show next week. Okay, so what else we got here? So how do we determine how many stops? Let's see. Oh, okay. So this question, this is back on the neutral density filter thing. How do you determine how many stops you need to get? Good question. I don't know. It really depends on the situation. Most variable ND filters are about 8 stops. And that's a lot of light when you think about it, okay? So that would block a ton of light. So the problem with the ones that are fixed is, again, you have to stack them. So you may get one that's 2 stops, one that's 6 stops, one that's 8 stops. But so that means if 2's not enough, you got to add another one, and they can be very expensive. Neutral density filters can really add up in price. Also, I should mention that the larger the filter, the more expensive it's going to be. So what I recommend, and this is what I do, is I buy the largest filter for the largest lens I have, which is generally 77 or 82 millimeter. It's a pretty good size filter. Then for about $10, you can buy a step down ring, and the step down ring will then take that 82 or 77 millimeter filter, and I can buy a bunch of them. So if I have a 52 millimeter, 58 millimeter lens, and I'm talking about the thread size now, not the focal length, or a 67 millimeter thread size, I can just buy an inexpensive step down ring and use that same filter on that lens. So it would then work on all my lenses, and I only have to buy one filter. So these things are going to probably be a couple hundred. They can be as much as $200 to $300. They don't have to be. I've seen them, some pretty good ones for around $99, that type of thing, for the neutral density, the variable ones. But just look around, get a good quality one, because you won't use it a lot, but when you use it, you don't want to. I should also mention, I'm sorry, this thing keeps going on and on here, is that if you, some of the neutral density filters, the variable ones, will shift color. If you get them too far, like close to the 8 or 9 stop range, it starts sometimes you'll get some cross hatching show up, or sometimes you'll get some color shift. It's just a natural thing that happens. I think my guess is because it's either something to do with the glass optics, or it's just starving the sensor for too much light. But the thing is, just mainly, I think it's probably an optics issue. You just don't want to crank it all the way to the 8 or 9 stop point. Just try and use it somewhere in between. Anyway, you're welcome, Wendy. I'm glad that was helpful. So that's what we're here for. So Wendy says thank you, and you are welcome. Okay, and Amaza says, okay, so what do you mean number of stops? Okay, so maybe I didn't explain that. Good point. Thank you for keeping me on track here. Again, it's just one of the things where I forget. Okay, let's say you're shooting at 2.8, or let's say f8. Okay, f8, and you need to block the amount of light coming into the camera. Well, then you'd go from f8 to f11, right? Then to go another stop, you go f11 to f14. And so every time you make that change, you're blocking one stop of light. Depending on the lens, it could be a third of a stop, but basically, or half a stop. It's basically about one stop. So that what it's doing is it's blocking that much light. Now, a stop of light is basically twice the amount of light coming into the camera. It's kind of confusing, but what you're trying to do is you want to block that much light. So in other words, if your lenses, if you've got it closed down to f22, let's say, and you're trying to shoot the waterfall example I was using before, and well, let's see, let me go back and do the shutter speed. Let's say the shutter speed you were using is at 1/60th of a second. You're trying to get that at. And or maybe it's at 1/25th of a second, and you need to go down to 1/20th of a second or lower. Okay, when you've got the lens all the way at f22 and you've got this ISO at 100, then the only way to block that light is to put a neutral density filter. So one stop of light, a one stop ND filter, which I don't think they make, would take it. Let's say we're at 1/60th of a second. It would take it down to what, 1/25th of a second. Okay, so that would be one stop of light. And you want to go, so that would be one. So if you have a 2-stop filter, then that means you could put that 2-stop ND filter on there, and you could get it down to 1/15th of a second. I guess it is. But if you need to go lower than that, then you need a 4-stop filter. 4 stops mean it would allow you to bring the shutter speed down 4 stops of light. I hope that makes sense. I hope it does. Anyway, I can give you some more if you email me directly, or I can give you some more information directly on this. So I can send you some. If you email me, I can send you a chart on how this works. They're really confusing as to the way they do them, quite honestly. All right. So let's see what else we got. Filters, countdown, transition. Okay. So let's see here. I think we have another question. Let's see if I can find it. Okay, here it is. Okay. So, here we go. Same. So, Krista asked, I'm looking to capture some moving water shots this weekend. I'm shooting on manual. What else do I need to know? And I edited this question a little bit because it was kind of long. But basically, it's the ND filter is what she needs to be able to do, because it's not just about you can go on manual, but it's not about being on manual. It's about it's about having too much light and being able to shoot at a slow shutter speed. So this is a perfect example of where a neutral density filter would allow you to block some of that light and shoot that water at a really slow shutter speed. So hopefully that answered that question. Let's see here. I got this. Okay. So the next one is, I understand you're supposed to keep your ISO as low as possible, but as a rule of thumb for shooting, for shutter speed and aperture. Okay. Yes. For shutters, there's no rule of thumb for aperture. Just use whatever you want to use based on how much information, what you want in focus. But when it comes to shutter speed, typically the rule of thumb is you want to be at least or double the shutter speed for the focal length. So what I mean, so this lens right here is a 70 to 200 millimeter lens. Okay, so if I'm zoomed out to 70 millimeter, then that means I want to be shooting on at least then I want to at least be shooting at maybe 1/25th of a second or more, or faster. Okay, let's say 1/60th would be double. All right, 1/60th of a second will let me get a if I'm handheld, of course, let me get a fairly steady picture when I'm shooting at with a 70 millimeter lens. Now, if I'm shooting at 200 millimeter though, that means I have to be shooting at 400th or faster of a second to get a sharp picture. Now, and a handheld, of course, tripod, all bets are off. But the reason is, and the analogy that I use is, again, let's say, for example, this is a laser pointer, and the laser pointer is aimed at your hand. And maybe there's a little bit of shake, a little bit of movement here. You really won't see much of that on your laser pointer, right? But if that laser pointer is aimed at a wall 30 feet away, then any little movement is going to look like a foot of difference, right? Because it's further away. It's just physics. So it's the same thing with your lens. If you're 200 millimeter, every little movement is going to show up. If you're wide at 35 millimeter, 24 millimeter, then you can have some movement and you're not going to see much difference. So that's the rule of thumb for shutter speed in using longer lenses and again, longer lenses. Again, is ISO, this goes back to the same thing again. It's great to have a lower ISO, but hey, nowadays these cameras are pretty fantastic, and I'd much rather have a sharp picture instead of and not worry about noise, because there's also software you can use that will take out some of that noise, but there's nothing you can do. Which one of these streams is giving me a problem here? There's nothing you can really do to fix it if you're having if the thing is noisy. I mean, or if it's not noisy, but if it's out of focus, there's really nothing you can do about that. And that's why you want to crank up the ISO if you need to. All right, let me look here. So how's this work? It looks like we're getting some stuttering on the Facebook stream for some reason. Okay, I don't know what's going on here. I'll close some windows just in case. All right, here we'll close this, and I'll close this one just in case that's the problem. Okay, all right. Okay, good, Hamas. I'm glad that helped. Okay, so the next question is, let's see what else we got here. Okay, I see refurbished lens on the Nikon site. What's the risk of getting a refurbished lens from them? Actually, I've purchased a number of used lenses. It's not refurbished, but used from individuals and from dealers. And I've had really good luck with that. The problem is really just one of warranty. If you buy a used lens, that's a little different. But when you buy something refurbished from Nikon, typically it's been returned, or maybe there was a problem and it's gone through remanufacturing and they've kind of brought it back up to specs. You won't get the 5-year warranty that Nikon offers, but I think you'll get maybe 90 days, if I'm not mistaken, on a refurbished product. So that's the only real risk, is that you won't get the full warranty of, I don't think, of what the lens was originally offered. So that's the only thing to look out for. But there's still no reason why you couldn't still get a refurbished lens. If you know what to look for, you just want something that mechanically works well, focuses well, not broken, that type of thing, obviously. And that's not a problem, because, again, you can get some pretty good deals on used lenses. Excuse me. And if you get a refurbished one, it's even better. All right, let's see what else we got here now. Okay, this one is, what's the best way to protect your pictures? Also, what's the easiest and most effective way to watermark? Okay, this is another question that is misleading, or I should say, I don't know. It's so that, first of all, there's no real good way to protect your. There is a good way to protect your images, but you have to ask the question, what is it you're protecting them from, and how valuable is the image that you're protecting? I see a lot of people put watermarks on photos that frankly suck. I can't believe they're putting their name on that photo. Number one, I wouldn't want my name associated with it because it's not that good. But number two, who's going to steal it? A picture of a sunset, for example. There's gazillions of pictures of sunsets out there. What makes yours unique? So I have a little bit of a problem with people that want to watermark everything they post thinking it's valuable. If you do have an image that's valuable, let's say it's a news story or something that's unique, that's a different story. So the way you protect your images is you have to register them with the Copyright Office, the U.S. Copyright Office in Washington, D.C. I believe it used to be $45 for, I forgot how many hundred. There was a lot. You could put hundreds of pictures. And what you would do is you would take those and you would register them with the Copyright Office. You could send them thumbnails of these images. You could do a lot of them at one time. And then that would register them. So now if for now you have to register them before you publish them. I believe there's two, if I remember correctly, there's two categories. There's published and unpublished, meaning unpublished is they're not been on Facebook, you haven't put them on anywhere, they're not in a publication, they're not online, they're not on your website for public consumption. That's unpublished. Published is maybe they're online, maybe they've been in a magazine or whatever, but they actually have been available for public consumption. So you can still register them, but you just need to select that category when you upload them. So then once you have your images registered, then if someone takes your image, then you have some recourse. Now, if it is a consumer, a friend, somebody didn't know any better or whatever, doesn't care, and they publish your photo somewhere, then there's not much you can do about it. I mean, the amount of money and time it takes to take them to court, them to court and get any kind of thing out of them is going to be minimal. It's just really not going to be worth it. So your only recourse there is, the best thing is to just have, if you really want to stop it, is to have an attorney send them a cease and desist letter. Now, if it's a commercial situation, that's a little different. If it's a major brand or a company that's using the product or using the photo, then could be some damages involved there. But once again, my first reaction would not be to go off the handle. Don't get all upset. Don't send them a nasty letter. Look at it, do the research, find out what image they're using, how it's being used. Then, before you contact them, you could have an attorney. But the thing is, if you have to take them to court, it's still it's still a lot of money. And I believe, if I'm not mistaken, I'm not an attorney, but I believe it has to be in federal court, which means that's even more expensive. So there has to be some real damages there. So anyway, so my point is, don't get all whacked out about watermarks and protecting your images. I mean, I can do a screenshot of any image there is, and take out just about any watermark I want using Photoshop, believe it or not, unless it's across the picture, and that's going to be annoying anyway. Okay. All right. Thanks. Okay. Oh, okay. So so YouTube is working. Okay, cool. So James says, great stuff. Thanks, James. Appreciate the comment. And you know, we try here. We don't always get it right, but sometimes we do the best we can. So, all right. So let's see what. So anyway, copyright stuff. Don't get all whacked out about copyright stuff. Do the best you can. Now, I see a lot of wedding photographers and people like that put their. It's a different thing to do branding, where you want your work to be seen. You want to know, oh, this is a beautiful picture. I want to know who did this so I can hire them. That's a little different. So I think the best way to use, you can do it in Lightroom, Photoshop. There's dozens of other programs that will do a watermark for you. It's typically, I think, 25% opacity is what I remember that I basically will use if I do a watermark. I don't even watermark my own stuff because, again, they want it, they can take it, and I'll deal with it if it's a commercial site. So anyway, okay, so let's see what else we got. Okay, so Alyssa says, can someone explain what ISO is and how to use it? Oh boy, gosh, that's a biggie. ISO. ISO is the sensitivity of the camera. Now, there's we can go into this in a lot of details, but my goal here is not to overwhelm people with a lot of technical information. There's a lot of information out there, you know, and you can get this in detail if you really want it, but I try to narrow this down. The purpose of this system is the reason for doing this is to help explain it easily, not make it more complex. So, in an easy way, the ISO is the sensitivity of the camera. Again, in film days, it was called ASA, American Standard Association, I think it is. And so film was rated in 100 ISO or 25 or 400. And all that really meant is how there's a standard, they would measure it, of how the film would react to light, how much light it would take to get a certain reaction from the film. It's the same thing with digital photography, except now I can just turn the dial and go from 100 to 400 to 1600 at a touch of a button, which is really cool. But it still is a rating of how sensitive the camera is to a certain amount of light. And again, I think there's a measurement. It's a standard that everybody uses. You'll find that some cameras are rated, they say it's like unrated or whatever. They'll give you a number, but it's not a calibrated number. Anyway, so ISO has to do with how sensitive the camera is to a certain amount of light. So what that means is, so you have 3 adjustments. I don't care if it's a $50,000 Hasselblad or a $200 or $100 film camera. They all work the same. There's really only, other than focus, there's only 3 adjustments that you can really make, okay? Aperture, shutter speed, and ISO. So if you change, so you can change your ISO to make your camera more sensitive or less sensitive. Here's the analogy I use. Again, I'm big on analogies if you haven't figured that out. You have a stereo system, right? And you don't have anything hooked up to it. It's just but it's plugged in and there's a speakers hooked up to it, but no turntable. Listen to me show my age. CD player, DVD, iPod, whatever you want to call it. There's no input, and you turn it up, and you turn it all the way up, and you start to hear hiss coming out of the speakers. All right, that's the same kind of thing that's going on with your camera. So your camera at the lowest setting, turned all the way down, there's not going to be any noise. It's going to be very quiet, but it's going to take a lot of signal to be able to trigger that sensor to be able to register the light. If you turn it up, It's going to be more sensitive. It just takes a little bit of a signal, but then you're going to get more noise. So that's the issue with ISO and why it's an issue. Nowadays, the great thing is you can put your camera on auto ISO, which means you can set the aperture and you can set the shutter speed if you wanted, and the camera will automatically adjust the ISO based on what you want it to do. In fact, you can even go in and set a high point, so don't go over this amount no matter what. So, okay, hopefully that helps with the question on that. So the other question we have is from Anna, and Anna asks, what lens do you recommend to take real close up and detail, for example, of a flower or a bee? Okay, Anna, thanks. Very great question, by the way. Okay, try not to give you too much information here, but every camera, I don't care which one it is, has a minimum focusing distance. So what happens is the lens will, if you look in the specs, it'll tell you, okay, this lens will focus at 1.5 feet. You can't be any closer than 1.5 feet, or what happens is the lens won't focus. So when you're doing macro photography, the problem is to get what's called a 1-to-1 magnification, where you really want that thing to be full screen and as big as you can in the image, or be as big as you can in the viewfinder. You got to get really close. So if a lens does not have a very close minimum focusing distance, then the picture, you're going to get an image or an object. You can still get a picture of it. You can zoom in, but it's still not going to be 1-to-1. Okay, so a macro lens, what a macro lens, or Nikon calls them micro lenses, everyone else calls them macro lenses. A macro lens lets you focus within 1/2 inch or so, maybe a couple of inches. So you can get really, really close on an object and get that bee or that flower full screen on your camera. And the reason you want to do that is because then you're using more of the sensor. Right? So you can take a zoom lens, and I can put this out here like this, and I could zoom in on it, and I could still get it zoomed in, but it's not going to be the same. It's not going to be as good a quality as if I can get in close on it and get it full screen. Also, macro lenses typically they're manual lens. There are some zoom lenses that have macro features, but the best ones are fixed or prime lenses. There's no zoom. You zoom with your feet. You got to move the camera in and out. So the best lens for doing a bee or flower, though, and this is where the difference comes in, because macro lenses come in all focal lengths. You can get a 40 millimeter, a 60 millimeter, 90 millimeter, 100 millimeter, 105 millimeter, 180 millimeter, I think 200 millimeter. The reason you want to match the focal length to what your subject is has to do with how close you want to get. So the only macro photography I do is product photography for my clients. And the lens I use is a 105 millimeter macro lens. And that lets me get far enough away so that I can still get a full 1-to-1 image size. But it means that my lights, I'm not going to be in this, my camera is not going to put a shadow over the image over the subject that I'm photographing. It's the same thing with doing bees or flowers or that kind of macro photography. If your lens is too wide, you got to get so close, then you're going to be right up on them and they're going to fly away or you're going to miss it. So you want a lens, I would say 90 to 105 millimeter is a good focal length for doing that kind of macro photography. You'll also find they're really, really sharp. They're typically sharper than anything else. And the other nice thing about a lens like that is it can also be used for portrait photography. There's nothing wrong with using, I have a 105, which I end up loaning to people more than I end up using it, I think, because I don't do that kind of much work. But you can also use that for doing portraits. So it's a great lens for portraits. It's extremely, extremely sharp, almost too sharp in a way. No, it doesn't make sense for portraits, but you don't want to see too much of this face. It's close up. Anyway, so let's see what else. Macro. Oh, so there's Sigma makes a really good one. I think theirs is 105 millimeter. The other one is a 90. Tamron, I think, makes a 90 millimeter macro lens, which is very good, very good. Canon makes a 100 millimeter. There's two versions, a version 1 and a version 2. I believe the version 2 is supposed to be much, much sharper. And if I didn't say this already, Nikon makes 105 millimeter macro. All really, really good lenses. They make some others, but those are the biggies. Those are kind of the most common. Okay. So before we move any further, I want to do something a little different this week. I want to show you guys a picture from somebody in the group there that's in the Photo Mentor group named Jessa Palmer. And Jessa, this is a picture that she took, that she posted. And I just wanted to comment on it. I've talked to her about it. I've given her a lot of feedback on it, but I just wanted to show you guys something. And I thought maybe it'd be kind of nice if you to review a couple of pictures from time to time. If you guys want to send me something to help at photomentor.tv, I'll try and give you some feedback on it. So she posted a number of pictures, but this is the one I love the most. And I want to tell you what I like about this picture. It may not be your style. Every picture, there's always, first of all, it's all aesthetics, right? We all have our own view on this kind of thing. Some people may like it, some people may like there are things I would do to this picture if it was my photo, but that's not the point. The point is my job is to encourage you. That's my job. I want you to get better, and I want to show you what you're doing right, not put what you're doing wrong, and I want you to improve. So that's why I'm showing you this photo. So there's some things I really love about this photo, and maybe I'll tell you a couple things I would change. But the thing I love about this photo is the composition. First of all, she had a couple of others, but the knife was not in the center. By the way, Jessa, if you're watching this, I didn't ask you. I apologize. I hope you don't mind me using this picture. So, as an example, I'm not picking on you, girl. The thing I love, she had some other ones, but the knife was not in the center. And I love the fact that the knife is right in the center. Now, normally you don't do that. Normally you're using rule of thirds, you kind of divide things up, but this really does do that. So if you look, he has one boot on the left side, on the first third of the frame, the second one in the other third of the frame, and then the object right in the middle. A little out of focus, a little soft in the back, which is kind of great, because one of the things I notice about most photography that the mistake they make is they're not thinking of the viewer. You have to think about what's the viewer going to see. Now, there's a technique I call squinting. It's not really squinting. I don't know how to describe it. But basically, if you were to squint at a picture, what I'm trying to get across is what's the first thing you see when you do that? What's the most important thing in the frame? I call it the hero of the frame. What's the most important item in the frame? And that's where you want to put the attention. That's where you want people to look first. So to me, the hands and the knife are the most important things, which is great, even though they're in the center of the frame. The other thing that works about this picture, the lighting is excellent. I'd like to see it a little more dramatic, but that's okay. It still works. The floor. See the lines in the floor? They draw your attention right to the center of the frame, right to the knife, which is the hero of the shot. And that's so she could even have pulled back a little bit and even had a little more floor, a little lower, to draw you in, and that would just bring your eyes right up to the boots and right up to the knife. The lighting on the hand is great. Again, it really brings that out. I just really like the picture a lot. It's just a terrific picture, and so this is an example of something that I want to encourage you to do, is experiment. This is something she was trying to do by herself. I think she told me she has a Canon T7i. It's not about the camera. It doesn't matter what camera you're using. This could have been done with an iPhone, and you would never know the difference. But the point is the composition, the emotion, the framing of the picture is great, and she just did an excellent job on this, and I'm just really proud of her for doing this. So, Jess, I hope you don't mind me showing this picture and using it as an example, but I think it's terrific, and I just want to see you do more of this kind of work. Okay. All right. Let's see what we got here. Any other new ones in here? Okay, so we're about out of time. I mean, I can go as long as you guys have questions, but I don't want to bore you here. See what else we got. So we got the ISO, and this last question is silly question. And as I said before, there are no silly questions. I love silly questions. I love easy questions because they make me look really smart. But truly, there are no silly questions. We all start at zero. Believe me, none of us know this stuff. We're not born with it. So I'm truly a beginner at this. What is a crop sensor? What does it do? And is it built into your camera? Or is it a detachable item? Now, that may seem like a silly question, but I think it's an excellent question, frankly. And the reason is I never thought about it. I mean, I would never have thought, oh, I need to answer this question, because I don't think, I just automatically think full frame crop. I kind of know what that is. So I love questions like this because it really brings me back down to the basics and what I need to share with you guys. And so this is Kaylin, this is a terrific question. So a crop sensor is nothing more than, in a 35 millimeter camera, obviously a film camera, the film was a 35 millimeter size. Okay, when they came out with digital cameras in the early days, that sensor technology was really expensive. So to be able to still make pictures, I mean, they came out with cameras that had small little sensors. It's called point and shoots, right? It says a tiny little sensor in there. That's a really crop sensor. But nowadays, what happens is so as the technology got better, the sensors got bigger and bigger, and the cost went down, and then they came out with full frame sensors. So then the digital sensor was the exact same size as a 35 millimeter negative. But they still continue to make crop sensors and do today, and the sensor is just a little bit smaller. It's typically, if you're talking about a 35 millimeter equivalent, it's the term is called APS-C. And I'll be honest with you, I can't remember what that stands for. APS-C. Anyway, not important. But an APS-C sensor is 1.5, right around 1.6 to 1.5 times smaller than a full frame sensor. Now, why? What's the benefit of that? The benefit is that it's lower cost. They can produce a camera that, and comes in at a lower price point, which is always a good thing. And the second thing is the lenses can be less expensive, because the way the lens works, it has to focus the light down to a certain point on the sensor. Well, the full frame cameras have to have better quality optics, and they have to have more elements in the lens to be able to do that, where a crop sensor can get away with less expensive lenses and smaller lenses and lighter lenses as well. So that's one of the benefits of having a crop sensor. The other thing is, the other thing you'll hear is, oh, well, full frame sensors and full frame cameras are better in lower light. That's sort of true. It's not as true as it used to be, because the technology keeps improving. So now you can get cameras with small sensor. Let's pick on an iPhone example. An iPhone is not super great at low light, because the sensor is probably about this big compared to a 35 millimeter, which is probably this big. But look at the quality when you got the right amount of light. Look at the quality that comes out of an iPhone. It's fantastic. So the technology has gotten better, and that picture I showed you of Jess's was a crop sensor camera, and I've got lots of other examples I could give you of people that have shot amazing pictures with crop sensors. So that's what a crop sensor is. It's in the camera. It's not something you add on, and the reason is it typically keeps the cost down. The lenses are lighter, and it's a good way to go. So there's something called cropping and field of view, and I'll save that for another time. But anyway. Okay, let's see. Again, I appreciate everyone asking questions. I appreciate you tuning in. It means a lot to me, and I hope this has been useful information. If you we'll do this again next Friday, 9 p.m. Eastern Time, 6 p.m. Pacific Time. If you have questions in the meantime, be sure and send them to help at, let's see here, I think I actually got a thing. I think help at photomentor.tv, and send that anytime. I'll be glad, and again, I'll reply directly, or we'll use it on next week's show, or both. And you can always join our Facebook group at facebook.com/photomentor.tv. And we're also on YouTube. Again, it's youtube.photomentor.tv. Will take you directly to the page. So anyway, I hope everyone's had a good time. I hope you've enjoyed this, and I hope it's been beneficial more than anything. Keep shooting. Remember, It's all about the technique. It's not about the technology. Do not get hung up on the fact of the camera. I know it's a big deal. Everybody wants to tell you about what kind of camera to buy and what, lenses and all this kind of stuff. It's not about that. And I can tell you from personal experience, I have way more equipment than I could ever use. And when I buy a new lens or something and I look at this is fantastic, I've been wanting this, and I look at my pictures and guess what? They still suck. And then I realize it's not the gear. It's the Yahoo behind the camera that's the problem. So my last piece of advice is if you're a new photographer, don't worry about shooting on manual. You'll get there. Shoot on auto if you need to. Worry about composition. Start learning composition, learning light, and learn to see. I don't care if you photograph with your phone. It doesn't matter. Just start learning to see and learn how to compose a picture, and that will make all the difference in your photography. Anyway, thanks again, everybody, and I enjoyed it, and we'll see you again next week.